It all started with a guy named Alex Montgomery. He had very friendly blue eyes and a smile that could melt anyone's heart. And to me, he was the best father in the world, without a doubt. About 16 years ago, my biological father left my mother and me when I was very young. My mom had no choice but to raise me on her own, and the truth is that it wasn't easy for her. Her life started to fall apart before I turned 6. She thought we wouldn't be able to make it, that everything would be a disaster, but just then, Alex showed up, a carpenter who made furniture and repaired wooden things in the workshop next to our house. My mom always says it wasn't love at first sight, but my dad swears it was. She never admits it, but in her heart, I know it's true. The official story is that he came into our lives when she went to fix an old wooden chair that was broken and rickety, and at that moment, something changed forever. Within weeks, that man became the light in our lives, and everything got so much better. He wasn't my biological father, but to me, he became more than that. He was always there, helping us, taking care of us, and asking for nothing in return. I learned to ride a bike with him. He read me stories at night, and he always seemed to love me very much. He was a super nice guy who not only protected us, but was also friends with all the neighbors. That's why they called him Alex the Good in our neighborhood. And everything seemed perfect, really. But of course, life can't be perfect forever. Everything started to change when I started 7th grade. For me, that stage started out nice, but school was still a difficult place because I wasn't a popular girl and didn't have many friends, which made me an easy target for bullies. At first, I thought I could ignore the harassment, but that wasn't the case. These bullies started destroying my books, vandalizing my locker, and constantly making fun of me. I remember that at that time, the only thing I wanted when I got home was to escape from school. The rest of the day became unbearable, and all I wanted was to take refuge with my dad. Whenever I got home, I would tell him about all the problems I had that day, and he, being very protective, did everything he could to defend me. He started trying to get the school to take action, talking to the principal and getting those who were making my life miserable suspended. But over time, things got worse. It seemed that the teachers didn't care much anymore, and the school told my dad that they couldn't keep suspending or punishing students. And what could I do if, on top of that, it seemed like I was the problem? That night, it all came crashing down on me, and as I cried, I asked my dad if there was something wrong with me. He hugged me and said something I will never forget. "No, my precious Rose, you have nothing to worry about. There is nothing wrong with you. Your classmates are just jealous of how great you are. Don't cry anymore and remember that I love you more than anything in the world." That always helped me in difficult times. It calmed me down, and that night, he also told me that I didn't have to go to school if I didn't want to, that he would talk to the principal himself, and he wouldn't force me to be there if I didn't feel safe. The truth is that I chose not to go that day and stayed in the woods near our house. It was a place we had known since we were little, a forest full of trees, tree houses, and trails where we always played after school or on weekends. Everyone in our neighborhood used it to escape for a while, to run, laugh, and be in touch with nature. It was like our special place, and on that day, with my dad, I felt so much better just being there in peace with him. The next day, on the way to school, I told my dad that I was going to defend myself if anything happened to me, but he smiled and reassured me. "Don't worry, Rose, you won't have to do anything. Dad already took care of it. We talked to the principal, and everything will be fine." At that moment, I believed that everything had been resolved, that the troublemakers would be punished or suspended. But when I got to class, Axel Hunter, who never missed a day and was the main bully at school, wasn't there. He was one of the worst kids, a jerk who was always picking on me. I was quite happy at first because I thought he might have been suspended, But that afternoon, they announced something unexpected over the loudspeakers. "Attention, students. Axel Hunter has not returned home since yesterday. His mother is here and is very worried. If anyone knows where he is, please come to the principal's office." I was in shock, seriously. I couldn't believe that a kid like that who had always given us trouble had disappeared. When I got home, I told my dad, and he calmly said, "Well, he's a troubled kid. He's probably just skipping class." Last week, I went to the office to complain about him and asked that he be punished, so that's probably why he didn't come today. But I wasn't convinced by that explanation. Even though I hated him, I didn't want anything bad to happen to him. It was the first time in our town that a child had disappeared like that, just like that. My concern was written all over my face, and my dad also seemed a little nervous, so he told me that it was probably just an absence and that everything would be back to normal in no time. But that wasn't the case. 3 days passed and Axel didn't come back, and the police started looking for him. Things got even worse in the following days because it wasn't just Axel. Little by little, more children began to disappear. In a week, 5 more had disappeared, and the tension in the village was palpable. The police managed to follow the trail, which ultimately led to the forest. Yes, the same place where we all used to play as children. People began to get scared, they became paranoid, and my dad, who had always been a very noble and protective guy, decided that we couldn't just sit idly by. He formed search parties, visiting the homes of the affected families and offering words of comfort, saying that they would find them. Before long, the authorities closed off the forest with fences, and the school implemented a strict curfew so that children would not go out after a certain hour. The community began to change, to become nervous, and the silence in the streets grew heavier. Since all this started, as awful as it sounds, school stopped being so horrible for me. The reason was that most of the children who had disappeared were the problem children. Without those people, the atmosphere in class improved greatly, and in fact, I had a little more peace. That night, after dinner, my dad said goodbye to me and my mom with a good night, telling us he was going to the shed in the backyard to plan a new strategy for the search. He told us he had to find a better way to cover more ground and find the children faster. My mom smiled at him and said something like, "You're already doing so much, Alex. We are so grateful for what you are doing for all of us." I just stared, unable to sleep, somewhat restless, and without knowing exactly why, I felt I had to go to that little shed out there. I don't know why, but I felt like maybe I needed to help him a little. So I got up and went to the kitchen to get him a glass of water. When I got there, I noticed that the lights were still on, so I assumed he was still there. But as I approached the door, something caught my attention. It was just a moment, a glance through the window. But as I got closer, I froze. I saw something that froze me in place forever. There, in that shed, was my dad, or at least I thought it was him, and he was holding something in a pillowcase, and even though I didn't want to, I couldn't look away. Little by little, I saw him fill that pillowcase with stones one by one calmly, with a precision that, I don't know, it shook me. And then with that same pillowcase, he approached a table that was further away. But when I looked in that direction, I was paralyzed in shock. There was a little girl there, about my age. She was tied to the table. And at that moment, she started screaming and begging for her life. She begged my dad not to hurt her. But at that moment, everything became even more terrifying. I couldn't hear anything because that small, soundproof structure made everything sound very distant. But I could clearly see what my dad was doing. He lifted the bag, filled with stones, into the air, and in a horrific act that still haunts me, he dropped it hard on her, and in seconds, he beat her almost to death. There are no words to describe how I felt. I just wanted to scream, run, do something, but my body wouldn't respond. I saw how the stones broke her skull, how her face was deformed and her blood spurted out. And in that terrible moment, that man who had always been my protector, who had been there for me like a superhero, now had an expression on his face that I had never seen before in my life. His eyes, which were always so kind, were swollen, reddened, and filled with a kind of fury that will remain etched in my memory forever. His body was there, motionless on the table, but even so, he didn't stop hitting her. It seemed like he couldn't stop. I was paralyzed with fear and couldn't do anything but cry and shake. But then something else happened. I managed to react and wanted to run to find my mom, but just then my dad saw me and in an instant caught up with me. I was petrified, completely paralyzed with fear. But instead of hurting me, he held me calmly, and with that gentle voice he had always had, which now seemed broken, he said, "My God, Rose, you shouldn't have seen this. This wasn't for you to see." I didn't react. I just cried in his arms. Then he hugged me tight and said, "Don't look at me like that, little one. I had to do it. Those kids were pure poison. They were rotting from the inside out, making everyone suffer. Normal punishments don't work with people like that. They had to be out of our way." Those words still echo in my head because at that moment my heart raced so fast that I felt like it was going to explode. And then he asked me for something that still makes me tremble every time I remember it. "Look at me, Rose. You're not going to tell your mom what you saw. Do you understand? Don't say anything. You know how much I love you. And if you keep this a secret, everything will go back to the way it was before." It was the hardest decision of my life. At that moment, I still loved that man, whom I had always considered my father, and even though deep down I knew that something very bad had happened, I didn't want anything bad to happen to him. But I couldn't handle the horror of the situation. In that instant, I started screaming in terror. And that's when everything changed. My mom ran out to where I was when she heard my screams, and when she saw what was in that shed, her expression was something I'll never forget. She also started screaming like crazy, unable to control her panic, which caused the neighbors to come running to see what was going on. Everything changed completely for me that day. The neighbors cornered my dad and called the police. I remember my dad kneeling on the lawn, his head down and that look of defeat on his face. All I wanted to do was scream and run to him. I was scared and desperate. The police began to surround the scene and shout instructions while I was scared to death. Watching my mom cry, watching my dad in a state of total confusion. But to my surprise, just when it seemed like things were going to end in something much worse, my dad, in an act that I still can't quite understand, slowly got up and started walking toward me. But instead of doing something violent, he knelt down again and hugged me tightly. His arms wrapped around me so tightly that it seemed like he wanted to absorb all the fear I was feeling at that moment. And just before he let go of me, he whispered in a voice that sounded like crying, "I'm going to miss you, little one." No one had ever said anything like that to me before, and I had never felt anything like it. But in that instant, that farewell hug was etched into my memory forever. That whole day, that moment of pure pain and what happened afterward, had an irreversible impact on my life and my mother's. The image of my father kneeling on the lawn and that last sentence have stayed with me to this day. The townspeople were in shock. No one could understand how good Alex could have been capable of doing something so horrible. The police questioned him immediately and asked him to tell them where the other 5 missing children were. He didn't deny anything, of course. He led us to the evidence and told us the whole story, and when they discovered the bodies, The analysis revealed a brutality that would make anyone's legs tremble. The victims had been beaten to death with stones, with all the violence one can imagine. 3 of the bodies were in the river at the bottom, wrapped in heavy stones and submerged in the current. The other 2 were in our own house, stuffed into plastic bags and hidden in the basement. The scene was hellish. The trial was even more terrible. When asked why he had done such a thing, my dad, with an unsettling coldness, said, "They were evil children who made my daughter suffer. Simple punishments didn't work, so I had to do something harsher. I don't regret it. I did it for my little girl because sometimes you have to act like a real father." Everyone in the room was speechless. He said these things with a chilling calmness, as if he were convinced he had done the right thing. But the most disturbing thing of all was that at that moment, the story of his past came to light. It turned out that in the 1960s, his family history was even darker than it seemed. All 8 of his siblings had also been murdered by their own father. It was an old case that was never solved, where it was said that this man had mercilessly abused his own children whenever they misbehaved or weren't nice enough. Legend has it that only the youngest children, including my dad, managed to survive that madness, and that he was later adopted by another family. But the trauma and wounds never really healed. My dad's lawyer tried to argue that it had been a case of insanity, the result of childhood trauma, and that in reality, his mind had been broken. But my dad, with his steady gaze and that same calm voice, said emphatically that he acted with a cool head, that he wasn't crazy, that everything he did knowingly, aware of what he was doing. And in reality, that was the most disturbing part. That deep down, I always knew it wasn't madness. Only, in his twisted way, he believed that what he was doing was right. That he had been using that girl, me, after the trial. My father was given life imprisonment without parole. My mom couldn't bear so much sadness, and we moved far away to my grandmother's house. Now I'm 23, I'm in college, and I only go back to town on rare occasions. Although I know he was a monster, deep down I still remember that father who, in some way, gave me a childhood. I don't forgive him, but I try to hold on to the good moments, the ones I still have in my memory, because in them, for a moment, that noble and loving man who made me feel loved and protected still lives on. I've always been one of those people who really enjoys Father's Day. I don't know, for me that day was like my chance to disconnect from the world and spend some special time with my dad without worrying about anything else. It was our time. This year, Dad decided we wanted to go camping near the lake, a few miles from the city, so we could fish and spend the night surrounded by nature. I was 15 at the time, and although I complained a little, deep down I was really excited about the idea. When we arrived, the view was simply breathtaking. Huge pine trees like towers, a lake so clean it looked like a giant mirror, and that characteristic smell of wet earth and trees that refreshes your whole body. But of course, we weren't alone. Near our tent, there were a couple of guys who had also set up camp. But they didn't seem like the typical quiet campers at all. They were dirty, they yelled a lot, and every so often they would stare at us with those strange looks, as if they were studying us but with nothing good in mind. What caught my attention the most was seeing how my dad's jaw tensed every time those guys laughed too loudly or even if they just looked at us a little too much. It was as if someone had given them a signal, and I think that's what started to make me nervous. After a while, my dad got up, walked over, and said in a firm voice, "Let's find another place to camp." You could tell he didn't like something, and although I didn't really want to leave that spot, I didn't argue. We packed up our things and moved to another spot, closer to the highway this time. The advantage was that we could still hear the trucks passing in the distance, so we weren't completely isolated. It wasn't ideal. I wanted something more secluded. But now that I think about it, I think Dad knew why he had chosen that spot. That night, with the sun hidden behind the giant trees, we roasted marshmallows while laughing at the poorly told scary stories Dad used to tell. I really enjoyed that moment, especially because Dad was sharing memories of when I was younger. We were in the middle of laughing when suddenly he raised his hand and signaled for me to be quiet. His eyes were suddenly super alert, as if something didn't add up, and in seconds, his smile was gone. He whispered, "Naomi, hide under the car." I was shocked. What was this madness? I looked at him confused and asked, "What? Why? What's going on?" But he was direct and cut me off. "Let's not argue, just do what I say." I got up, a little scared, and started walking toward our car, which was parked right under a big tree in total darkness. I got underneath it and started to hear footsteps approaching. A few minutes later, I saw 2 pairs of boots coming closer, and without a doubt, it was those weird guys from the camp. I had no doubt it was them. I stayed quiet, just watching. One of them greeted my dad and asked him with a sinister smile, "Having fun?" My dad nodded calmly and replied, "Do you need anything?" Then one of the guys let out an awkward laugh and said, "No, we just came to hang out with you guys." "Hey, where's the girl?" I could see his eyes darting around our campsite, like a hawk searching for prey. My dad remained very calm, poking the embers of the fire with a poker, and replied, "She went fishing. You guys better get out of here." The guys looked at each other, exchanging a strange glance, and suddenly one of them started walking toward our car. My heart was beating so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. Then my dad stood up, still holding the poker, and shouted, "Didn't I tell you to leave?" The other guy, closer to him, replied with an annoyed laugh, "He's just going to take a leak. Don't worry, unless you have something valuable in the car." As he said that, he let out another laugh that sounded wrong, as if he was enjoying the moment. The second guy walked a few steps away from the car, pointed his hand toward some bushes, and I could clearly hear him humming as he relieved himself. Now that I think about it, that explains why my dad asked me to hide under the car instead of inside the tent or something. He probably knew these guys were checking everything, looking to see if anyone was in the tent or if there was anything valuable. I calmed down, took a deep breath, and tried to stay calm. When the guy was done, he came back to Dad, and they both said goodnight before walking away. Just in case I didn't come out right away, I waited a few minutes, probably about 5, and watched Dad move quickly, gathering up everything we had except the tent. He didn't care much about that part because he wasn't worried about those things at the moment. In a few minutes, everything was in the car, and as soon as the door unlocked, I jumped into the passenger seat. My dad made a quick call to the police, telling them what had happened and reporting the presence of those guys who were following us. We didn't go back to the house that night. We went straight to the police station, and believe me, Dad was absolutely right. Those guys were following us, but they didn't know that with Dad behind the wheel, it wasn't going to end well for them. When their car arrived at the police station, a patrol car blocked them and arrested them for following us and threatening a minor. The police officer asked Dad if they were the guys from the campground, and he looked them in the eye, very seriously, and said, "You're lucky I called the police instead of leaving you buried forever in that forest, because I would have done it." And he lifted his jacket and showed them the 9mm gun he had at his waist. You don't want to know how hard it was for me to stay calm at that moment, but I tried to be brave like my dad. And for all of you who love nature and go camping sometimes, I say this: always follow your instincts, because sometimes that little voice can save you in those situations. My father is 75 years old, lives in a care home called Pinewood, and sadly has dementia. His thoughts are on the edge. Sometimes he remembers me and sometimes he doesn't. And on bad days, he doesn't even know who I am. He just looks like a polite stranger in a suit, staring at you with empty eyes and not knowing who you are. But no matter what, it has always been a pleasure for me to be with him and spend time together. I remember that Sunday as if it were yesterday. It was a sunny day, but to me the weather seemed strange, very gray despite the good weather. When I arrived, the staff was helping Dad get into the car. Nurse Ira approached me with that expression she always has when she has something important to say and said, "Clara, you should know that your dad's routines have changed a bit since he was diagnosed with dementia. Sometimes at night, he wakes up." I frowned, a little concerned, and asked her what exactly she meant. But instead of giving me a clear answer, she said, "I would recommend that you take one of our assistants with you. It's a free service, and if you leave him alone..." I didn't let her finish. I cut her off and told her no, that I couldn't take care of him by myself that day. My dad is my dad, and no, I'm not going to leave him in someone else's care. It's not that complicated. What could happen in 48 hours? And with that, I got into the car, right next to her, with Dad in the back seat, buckled up and calm for now. Before the taxi started, I took one last look at Nurse Ira, and she smiled awkwardly at me, as if she wanted to say something but didn't have the courage. The ride home was super quiet, but it felt weird. Dad seemed lost in his thoughts, looking at the streets with childlike curiosity, as if he were seeing them for the first time. Honestly, leaving the nursing home and having him back with me was a huge relief after so long. When we got to the apartment, I took him straight to the guest room, which I had prepared with a vase of flowers and fresh sheets just for him. I watched him sit on the bed, stare into space, and then suddenly whisper, "Clara, I'm hungry." That moment broke my heart. After so long, it was the first time in a long time that he had called me by my name. I ran to the kitchen and made 2 sandwiches, one for each of us. Hours passed, and without realizing it, they were like a dream. We ate together, laughed, and remembered things from when I was little. It was great to see my dad being a dad again, even if it was only for a little while. After dinner, I asked him if he wanted to watch a movie, and to my surprise, he agreed. We lay down on the living room sofa and started watching The Lion King. I just watched him, how his face changed with every emotion, every smile or tear that the story provoked. I was so tired that at one point, I think I fell asleep. What I didn't know was that something horrible was going to happen that night. I woke up to a strange silence. The movie had ended and the screen was paused on the credits. I looked to my side and Dad was gone. My heart was in my throat. I called out frantically, "Dad, Dad, where are you?" But there was nothing but total silence in the apartment. I got up from the sofa and started looking for him, with the feeling that something very bad was about to happen. From the living room, there was a dimly lit hallway, and my bedroom was at the end of that hallway. I stood there on the threshold with my back to the other end and called out again, "Dad, where are you?" Just then, I felt someone running behind me laughing. I turned around quickly and saw no one. So I turned on the hallway light, and what I saw froze me in my tracks. My bedroom door was ajar. I tiptoed closer, afraid of scaring Dad if he was still in there. When I entered, I was paralyzed, and my mouth fell open in shock. My dad had opened the giant window in my room, and oh my God, half of his body was already outside, leaning down and looking at the streets as if he were about to jump. My voice trembled as I called out to him, "Come back here, Dad." He slowly turned his head to look at me, but what I saw was not my dad. His face was different, distorted. A horrible smile spread across his face, and his eyes were completely red, as if they were bloodshot. "I should jump," he said in a chilling voice, as if it came from beyond. Fear paralyzed me. I screamed, tears in my eyes, "What are you saying, Dad? Please don't do that." Then he began to walk slowly toward me, like a baby learning to take its first steps, with clumsy, desperate steps. "You should jump with me, I can push you," he whispered, smiling like a child. Then he burst out laughing, that crazy laugh that makes you tremble. At that moment, I don't know why, but I started backing away without being able to stop myself. It was my dad, but it wasn't him. What was happening? At that moment, I understood why Nurse Ira had warned me that morning, but at that moment, everything was spinning. Fortunately, I had my phone in my pocket, so I took it out and dialed 911. I explained what was happening, and as soon as I told them to come, Dad stopped. His face changed again, and that smile he had before turned into an expression of pure hatred. "Do you want to put me back in that cage?" he shouted, and he started banging his head against the wall as if rage was consuming him from within. I could only watch in shock as he screamed and lost control. Only when he started bleeding did I realize that something very, very wrong was happening in his head. At that moment, I knew that my dad was really not okay, and that he probably never would be again. I ran to him and grabbed him by the shoulders, trying to stop him, but he was stronger than me and managed to break free, falling unconscious on the floor. Seeing him like that almost drove me crazy. When the paramedics arrived with the ambulance, he was crying like a 9-year-old boy, all alone on the sidewalk. My heart was so broken that I couldn't do anything but cry. Nurse Ira hugged me and cried with me. That moment, seeing someone you love in that state, in such a brutal descent into madness, was the worst thing that has ever happened to me in my life. My dad hasn't had another episode like that, but now he spends most of his time sedated so he doesn't hurt himself. It hurts me so much that it's like that, but I know it's for the best. As for me, it's as if that night stole a piece of my soul and I can never get it back. This was one of those places that everyone in our group considered our special place, a bridge near the woods where we could do whatever we wanted without anyone bothering us. We laughed out loud and took silly pictures, and we also talked about things we would never dare to say out loud at school. That afternoon, something in the air felt different, heavier, as if something strange was happening, but of course I didn't think much of it at the time. My friends Jake and Emily and I had crossed that bridge more times than I can count. We laughed about how I almost fell through a crack in the boards, and Emily stayed back a little, phone in hand, getting ready for one last photo. "One more for Instagram," Jake said, with one of those smiles that makes you think it's going to be a funny photo. Emily made a face and smiled. "You'll thank me when we're famous," she said, still smiling as she adjusted the frame. But what we didn't see was a guy standing there silently at the far end of the bridge. He was a strong man wearing a blue jacket, jeans, and a cap pulled down low to cover his face. He didn't move, just stared at us. We didn't notice his presence until it was too late. "Watch out for that guy," Emily whispered loud enough for us to hear. "We better get out of here." Then Libby, our other friend, paused for a moment to put her phone in her pocket. We hurried off the bridge, trying not to show how nervous we were. But as soon as we passed underneath, he turned calmly, stepping on the wood with heavy, deliberate steps. Jake blurted out, "Let's go now." And Emily looked at me, her face pale. Suddenly, when he turned around, the guy called out to us in a harsh, dry voice, "Hey!" We froze. Then, in a move that made our blood run cold, he pulled something out of his jacket and pointed a gun at us. "Get down the hill," he ordered, and we fell to the ground in an instinctive act. The ground was cold and sticky, soaking my jeans. Then he pulled out a knife, the blade reflecting what little light there was, and approached us with the kind of expression that only someone who is completely out of control can have. At that moment, Libby started crying and begging him not to hurt her, saying she would do anything if he would just calm down. But the guy didn't care. He grabbed her by the hair and threw her back, angrily, and before we knew it, the blade flashed across her neck in a violent and brutal movement. We were speechless. At that moment, I felt my heart stop. The sound was horrible, wet and heartbreaking. Blood began to gush out and splattered everywhere. Libby opened her eyes in utter horror and her mouth moved as if she wanted to say something, but she just gasped and scratched her neck in desperation. Her legs kicked uncontrollably, trying to crawl away, but the blood was quickly draining her and her movements became slower and slower. In a matter of seconds, her eyes were empty and fixed on the sky with that expression of fear that will never leave my mind. Emily screamed with a force I cannot describe, a scream that still makes my hair stand on end just remembering it. She tried to run, but he picked her up and threw her back to the ground. He crouched down beside her and with an otherworldly calm touched her gently and made a small red line on her cheek with a knife, as if it were a simple act of play. But then he became much colder. He looked at her and asked with a mocking smile if she thought a certain Ben could save her. Who the hell was Ben? We didn't know. All I know is that this guy put the knife to her throat and lifted her face up, while blood dripped down her neck. She started moaning and crying, begging for help, but he didn't stop, and we were far away, and if we got closer he would surely shoot us. As we watched helplessly, the guy stabbed her in the abdomen with a brutality I still can't understand. Her scream was heart-wrenching, one of those sounds that remain etched in your memory forever. At that moment, she turned her head toward me, her eyes filled with fear, all in an instant. "Stop him!" was all she managed to say before her body relaxed and she lay still, staring up at the sky. Without thinking, I started to run. I just wanted to get out of there and leave that nightmarish scene behind. My legs were burning and it hurt to breathe, but I couldn't stop. Jake did the same, and I could hear him behind me. The branches, the leaves scratching my face. It all happened in a second. All I could hear was that man's boots crushing the leaves, each step getting closer, and Jake's screams fading into the distance. But at that moment I couldn't think of anything but my own survival. As I ran desperately through the forest, I lost my balance and fell face down on the ground, covered in mud and with my hands covered in blood that I didn't even know belonged to. Despair set in, but I forced myself to get up with all my strength. The forest felt immense, endless, with trees closing in around me and putting more and more distance between that damn place and my racing heart. Finally, I reached the road. The headlights of a car that stopped suddenly blinded me and I collapsed on the pavement, screaming uncontrollably. I couldn't do anything else. A woman ran out of the car, her face pale and frightened, and all I could stammer was, "He has them." I spent almost 2 days in the hospital. When I finally emerged from that cloud of darkness, I was given the worst news. They had found my friends, but it was too late. Libby and Emily's bodies were in a horrible state with injuries I can't describe, and they were totally unrecognizable. The last thing Libby managed to capture on her phone was a blurry photo of the guy on the bridge, and also an audio recording of her trembling, terrified voice that will remain forever etched in our memories. Luckily, Jake also managed to survive. The guy stabbed him with the knife, but luckily he managed to escape. When the man was arrested in 2022, I thought I would finally feel relief, but that wasn't the case. He wasn't a monster hiding in the woods. He was someone who passed by unnoticed in the grocery store, in everyday life. Emily's biological father. It was her mother who identified him, as Emily didn't know him. To this day, I wonder if that monster knew it was his own daughter he was murdering that afternoon. Now I still dream about her screams, the knife, the blood, and her eyes full of panic. It's something I'll have to live with for the rest of my days. This happened to me when I was little. It was a pretty sunny afternoon and my mom asked me if I wanted to go with her to Walmart to buy some cleaning supplies. I told her I also needed a new set of colors to make a Father's Day card, and she agreed quite coolly. When we entered the supermarket, I was paralyzed. It was huge, seriously. It seemed endless. At that moment, I squeezed my mom's hand tightly because I was a little overwhelmed by its magnitude. She patted me gently on the back and said, "Let's go find some new crayons." My mom was always like that, you know? She knew how to make me feel better even in those tense situations. To me, she was always like a superhero, and at that moment, I soon realized why. We started walking down the aisles, looking from side to side, seeing everything there was. For me, coming from a small town, it was also impressive. But the strangest thing started to happen when I realized there was a woman who seemed to be following us. We moved through the supermarket and that woman suddenly appeared in every aisle as if she knew exactly where we were and was always close by. No matter which direction we went, she always ended up a few steps behind. Or maybe it was the other way around, I don't know. My mom didn't notice because every time she turned around, the woman would hide behind the shelves or in a corner. I thought about telling her, but for some reason I forgot at that moment. Then, when we got to the stationery section and were about to look at the coloring sets, my mom told me to wait there for a moment while she went to the bathroom. I was a responsible kid in those things, so I did, but my eyes kept looking for her every now and then. A few minutes passed, and suddenly it seemed to me that my mom was taking much longer than usual. And just as I was standing there, staring at the entrance to the section, I felt a chill on my shoulder, and when I turned around, I came face to face with that same woman. She was right behind me with a huge smile and eyes that shone strangely. She asked me in a very calm voice, "Are you waiting for your mom?" I nodded nervously. She stroked my cheek and said something I still can't forget. "I'm your mom's friend." That sentence left me paralyzed. Then she added, "I'll take you to her." I looked around confused and told her that my mom had told me to wait there until she came back. The woman bent down a little, as if to be at the same height as my face, and said to me in a strange voice, "What are you going to do with those crayons?" I replied proudly, "I'm going to make a card for my dad for Father's Day." She smiled even more and asked me, "You love your dad a lot, huh?" Her eyes moved a little, and I thought those questions didn't make much sense, but anyway. Suddenly she grabbed my hand very tightly and started walking. "Let's go see your dad," she said. "How about we go see him together?" She picked up the pace, and then she started looking back constantly. My intuition told me that something was wrong with that woman, so in a confused voice I asked her, "But what about my mom?" She slowly turned her head, and that ear-to-ear smile stayed there as she whispered, "I'll be your new mom. A better mom. Trust me." At that moment, she started walking faster, and her grip on my wrist was so tight that it hurt. I felt that something very bad could happen if I didn't get away from her. Just as we were near the exit, I heard someone shout my name. "Andy, stop! Don't go with her!" Everyone in the store turned to look at us. And there was my mom, running toward me, her head bleeding. Her clothes were soaked in blood and she could barely stand. I saw her crying and thought, this can't be happening. That woman, the one who had been following me, was trying to take me away from my mom by any means necessary. And at that moment I also screamed with all my might, "Mom, let me go! Please, let me go!" I yelled at the woman. The people around us began to understand what was happening, that this strange woman was trying to kidnap me somehow. The woman, feeling cornered, ran away from the scene, frightened. Walmart security called the police and they quickly took us to the nearest hospital. My dad and my uncle were also on the phone, aware of everything. When security showed the cameras and the images of that woman taking a child, who was of course me, my dad turned pale. The first thing he said was, "That woman is a former coworker. She's obsessed with me and has been harassing me for months." She was the reason he left his job and changed his life. And now it seems she was following us here too. My mom later told the police that it was in the bathroom where that woman attacked her, hit her on the head, and almost knocked her unconscious. But she managed to get up out of fear, for her son and for everything that was at stake. Finally, they found the kidnapper. Her name was Layla, and she was arrested for assault, kidnapping, and harassment. My dad even got a restraining order against her. But no, this time we didn't have to move out of town or go into hiding. The story was clear, and even today, when I close my eyes and think about it, I remember how brave my mom was to run and save me. To me, she will always be my true hero. The truth is that there was nothing unusual about that night, no music, no alcohol, nothing. We were just 4 kids hanging out in the basement of a friend's house. His name was Jack. The basement was nothing special. It was half renovated, with concrete walls, a beat-up sofa, and an old light bulb hanging down that flickered a lot, as if it were already giving it all it had. However, that night started out pretty normal, until Jack took out something he found in a box in his brother's storage room. It was an old Ouija board, the kind they used to play Contact the Dead, you know. The truth is that we all thought it was fun at the time, so without thinking too much about it, Jack suggested we use it that Father's Day weekend. He says the idea was to try to contact someone's father and scare each other. Typical silly boy humor. We laughed a lot, because that was our thing, having fun with absurd and slightly macabre things. But deep down, we all felt something strange in that basement, even though we didn't say anything. The room wasn't scary in itself, but there was something in the air, like an invisible weight or that feeling that maybe we were playing with something beyond our control. So, with a little nervousness, we placed the board on the floor, turned off the light, and lit some candles that were in a drawer near the washing machine. 3 candles in a triangle, nothing too elaborate. The light from those candles was dim, yellowish, and flickered as if it didn't want to be there. We all leaned forward, and Jack, who seemed the most confident, said, "If anyone is here with us, say something." The first time, nothing happened. The board remained silent, still, with only the tip of the planchette there in the middle, blank. Suddenly, the pointer began to move slowly. At first, I thought Jack was moving it, but no, it kept going on its own, as if it had a life of its own, spelling out the word Dad. We all stared at each other in silence, waiting for someone to laugh or for it to be some kind of cheap trick, but no one said anything. Mason, one of the others, was left with a dry mouth, and Jack licked his lips with a superficial smile, trying to look calm. Then he asked me to continue, and clearly we didn't feel like stopping. We asked, "Who do you want to talk to?" And the pointer began to spell Mason, which was the name of one of my friends. We were paralyzed, seriously. I couldn't even move. That weird feeling grew, and we all looked at each other nervously. Suddenly, the pointer moved again, faster, with determination. "Where is he?" Mason got nervous, and with a nervous look on his face, he said something like, "Well, that was a good one. Happy Father's Day, Dad, I guess." But then the board responded, "Trevor." That was my name, and it froze me. My hands began to shake uncontrollably, and no, I wasn't moving anything. The pointer just kept moving away and spelling out things we didn't expect, which made us feel even worse. Liar, bad, disrespectful. The thing started scratching the board with some anger, and we all tried to remove our fingers, but it was as if it was trapping us there, with the feeling that we couldn't let go. Suddenly, a candle went out on its own, and everything started to get even darker. The room seemed to be breathing heavier, and we felt that something else could happen at any moment. There was a long moan, like a sigh coming from the floor, or maybe from below, I wasn't sure. We were all petrified. And then the board started moving letters on its own, without hands, spelling out, "Obey." And just then, another candle went out. It was completely dark, with no open windows or drafts, just pure darkness. I tried to turn on the light with the switch, but it didn't work. I looked at Mason and Connor, and their faces were also white with fear. We tried our phones, but they were all dead, out of battery. The feeling that someone else was there was very strong. Even though you couldn't see it, you could feel that presence, that gaze piercing through you. Then something hit from above, hard, as if someone had thrown themselves against the ceiling. It stopped, but soon it started again, closer. And at that moment, we heard footsteps, slow but steady, coming down the stairs. They weren't heavy footsteps, but soft, like a shuffle, and they were measured, as if there was no hurry but an intention to be there. It reminded me of how my old man used to walk down the hall in the old house we lived in, with that weight in his steps and the sound of my younger sister Belle shuffling behind him. The basement door started to move. Jack kicked it hard, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. He hit it with his shoulder and yelled, but nothing. The footsteps were still there, standing behind that door that looked more like a crack than an entrance. And suddenly, we heard a voice. Something that sounded low, steady, as if someone knew they were in control of everything. "I'm here now." It wasn't a shout, nor did it sound angry, but very calm, as if it were just telling us that it had arrived and that we weren't going to win. The door began to crack in the middle, and something came out of that crack. It was a figure, a man, but with sagging gray skin, as if it were rotten. He wasn't wearing any clothes, just that loose skin that seemed to hang from his bones. His eyes were yellow and his nails were black. I felt my heart racing, and at that moment I thought back to the old house, to the night my brother and I were hiding in the closet while he was doing drugs or whatever, and we thought we were never going to get out alive. That memory came back strong, and in that instant, that monster raised its hand, and without saying a word, looked at us all with a smile that seemed twice as bad as any scary story. Connor threw a chair at it, but the creature didn't flinch. In one swift motion, it grabbed Connor by the face and lifted him off the ground with impossible strength, as if he were made of paper. He started kicking and hitting, trying to break free, but he couldn't. The thing was cutting off his air with its dirty fingers, and I just wanted to run, scream, do something, but I couldn't move my legs. I just stood there paralyzed, watching as that thing held him, watching as blood began to pour from his chin from squeezing his face so hard. I tried to jump in to help him, but something in the air prevented me, as if the atmosphere itself were dense, trying to stop me. Suddenly, Mason lunged to one side and with all his strength, threw himself at the creature and knocked it down, hitting it again and again with a piece of wood he found nearby. The beast turned on him, and in the blink of an eye, it grabbed Mason by the neck and lifted him into the air with brutal force. Mason could barely move, but the expression on his face was one of pure fury. Then the creature let him go, and we, in shock, began to back away. I tried to scream and run, but at that moment that thing saw me and took a step toward me. The stench of its scent was indescribable. Blood, mold, rotten flesh. I felt something pierce me, the deepest fear I have ever felt in my entire life. The creature crouched down, leaned over, and whispered in that voice colder than ice, "You always disobeyed, even though I gave you everything." And in a second it grabbed me by the neck with its bony, cold fingers, squeezing with tremendous force. My vision began to blur and I could barely breathe. I kicked, I scratched, I tried to free myself, but it didn't work. At that moment my hand touched something on the floor, a piece of broken planet, a piece of something sharp. I grabbed it and stabbed it in the shoulder, and the scream it let out was not one of pain, but something deeper, darker, as if it were writhing in something metallic. The creature's skin began to tear, steam came out of the wound, and in the blink of an eye it let go, dropping me to the floor in pain. I circled the table, broke the board with my elbow several times until it split in two, and in that instant the candles exploded in a blinding light that filled the entire basement. The creature screamed, much louder, as if it were being dragged back to where it came from, and everything shook, the walls, the floor, the air. The door flew open and Mason grabbed Connor, who could barely breathe, and the two of them started running up the stairs without looking back. I never saw Jack or the others again that night. We left them there in that basement with no other choice. Truthfully, I never saw them in person again. Mason now walks with a limp and Connor doesn't answer my calls. Jack's house was sold, and they never found that body, only that stain on the wall with a name carved in something black, Trevor. I don't celebrate Father's Day. I don't talk about that night, and I don't go near anything that has to do with spiritual or fun things. And from time to time, when I wake up too quickly in the middle of the night, I still hear that voice very softly in my head. "Dad misses you," says.